Group South Africa.
Program Director Andile Khumalo, Sunday Times Editor Stembiso Msomi, Business Connection CEO Jonas Bohoshi, and Eskom CEO Andre Doreta. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It's a privilege for me to deliver the Chairman's report for 2020. Over the last 5 years, we have always gathered in person in Sandton for the Directors' event, suitably known as South Africa's biggest board meeting. This year, we are meeting online in a world that is quickly adjusting to new ways of doing things. The Directors' event is an important platform for business leaders to share ideas in a constructive, frank and open manner, as we try to contribute towards the development of sustainable solutions to some of South Africa's pressing challenges. While I'm not able to join this virtual event live, I'm very grateful that I still have the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion through a pre-recorded message. I've been asked to share my thoughts this morning on what it takes to do business successfully in South Africa and what is required in order for us to drive our economy towards a place of prosperity and pride for every South African. We can all appreciate the enormity of the task given the profound challenges that we face as a country. I will start by reflecting on the current state of our economy. Last month's announcement that the economy had shrunk by about 1/6 in the second quarter prompted many to reflect deeply on where we are as a country, how we got here in the first place, and most importantly, what we are going to do to prevent our economy from falling off a fiscal cliff. While quarter two's startling slide is driven overwhelmingly by the imperatives of lockdown, the reality is that for the past few years, we've been operating in an economy characterized by subdued growth, rising public debt and unemployment, as well as low investor confidence. What the recent GDP figures did was to lay bare the fundamentally ailing state of our economy. Weaker growth and a widening deficit have set South Africa on a much more negative and potentially treacherous debt trajectory. In order to correct this, tough measures need to be taken, including drastic changes in the composition and efficacy of government spending. If our public debt is left unchecked, it could thrust the country into a debt crisis, a point highlighted by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni in his June supplementary budget speech. I've little doubt that the same issue will be one of the fiscal focal points of his medium-term budget policy statement. What matters most, however, is a clear response plan that all stakeholders can support and a relentless focus on its implementation, underpinned by a credible accountability framework. Another serious challenge we face is declining investor confidence, which is an essential indicator for investment prospects, economic growth, and employment opportunities. The country's weak fiscal position, the slow pace of dealing with corruption, policy uncertainty, and subdued growth prospects continue to weigh negatively on both domestic and foreign investor confidence, with the latter reducing the attractiveness of the country's assets and potentially undermining foreign capital inflows. Adding to this is a seemingly intractable energy challenge that has seen Eskom resorting to load shedding even as the economy is already under such pressure. A study released earlier this year by the CSIR estimated that power cuts cost the economy about 120 billion in 2019. This is crippling for an industrialized economy such as ours and has dire consequences, especially for small business, which will now have to contend with the devastating effects of COVID-19. Growth forecasts for the near future are not promising either. Economists believe that the recovery is likely to be slow and uneven, particularly in the environment that is likely to be characterized by much higher levels of debt in both the private and public sectors. COVID-19 lays bare challenges of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. The pandemic has also highlighted the extent of the country's steep socioeconomic challenges, which, amongst others, include inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Unemployment, using the expanded definition, which includes discouraged job seekers, stands at 42%. This paints a disturbing picture, which will have devastating consequences for the country if we are not able to engineer rapid economic recovery. Government's $500 billion COVID-19 social relief and economic support package, announced in April, is a short-term measure and can only do so much to contain the impact of the pandemic. Many in our vulnerable communities have lost their jobs and livelihoods due to the lockdown. Put simply, the impact of the pandemic will be felt for a long time to come. Greater collaboration and unity is a positive spin-off of COVID. And despite the dire circumstances I've just described, there have also been positives on which we should build. I believe that the pandemic has cultivated a greater sense of collaboration and cooperation between various stakeholders. We saw unity in action through the quick mobilization of financial contributions for the Solidarity Fund. Companies, government, philanthropic organizations, political parties, and individuals rallied together in support of government's efforts to minimize the impact of the pandemic on business and communities. Through Business for South Africa, the business sector expanded its response from humanitarian and public health support to proactively devising an economic recovery plan that government has considered in its overall recovery plan. An estimated 400 people, seconded from the private sector, worked pro bono to coordinate the business's response to COVID-19. This has given us an impetus to craft a new economic path through bold action, underpinned by collective resolve to resuscitate our ailing economy. After all, the only way to achieve the promise of improving the lives of South Africans is through a vibrant and growing economy. So, given all these challenges, what will it take to do business in South Africa and resuscitate our economy? In responding to this question, I want to start by saying that our journey towards economic recovery is going to require a socio-economic compact between government, organized business, labor, and civil society. A compact that focuses on shared national prosperity and accepts the need for compromises, trade-offs, and sacrifices. I know that's a huge task, given the sometimes divergent sectoral interests. However, a crisis such as this offers an opportunity to do things differently and together. Therefore, to help frame my thoughts, I thought it would be useful to look at the efforts through the lens of short and medium and long-term interventions. Having already spoken about the rising public debt, I shall not belabor the point and rather wait for the Minister's forthcoming policy speech. In the short term, I believe that there are a number of low-hanging fruits that can be harvested swiftly, thus helping to break our current downward spiral. They can also provide positive momentum for long-term economic growth. Firstly, reform of state-owned entities that are critical for development into efficient economic growth drivers is a necessity. There's been promising action focused on turning around entities such as Eskom and the appointment of new strong leadership at SARS and Transnet. Such reforms will also help us in achieving a sustainable fiscal position. A heightened sense of urgency to SOE reform is necessary. Secondly, securing electricity supply in a liberalized market is one of the interventions that are required urgently. We need access to diverse energy resources in sustainable quantities and at affordable prices. Government's strategic overhaul of Eskom to create 3 strategic divisions for generation, transmission, and distribution will help increase operational efficiencies, bolster accountability, and unlock private investment. There's also a need to further open up the energy sector to independent power producers and smaller players to enable provision of additional electricity to the grid and a diversified energy mix of renewables from the private sector. Government's recent announcement that the energy regulator plans to add additional power to our strained grid from 2022 is encouraging. Thirdly, reviewing the regulatory framework to facilitate digital migration and releasing much-needed spectrum is key to opening up the growth of the telecommunications sector and the broader economy. Although the delay in the spectrum auction from September this year to March 2021 was disappointing, the emergency release of spectrum back in April for the duration of the national state of disaster is a good indicator of what can be achieved in this area with the necessary political will. The state should leverage private sector expertise in broadband rollout rather than relying exclusively on state-owned companies. Greater connectivity is a critical source for overcoming socioeconomic divides and lower levels of poverty and inequality. The services sector is a major user of telecommunications services. Due to the network effects of improved connectivity, the anticipated cost savings and quality improvements to telecoms are expected to promote efficiency in commercial and public services. Fourth, the process of reviewing and amending South Africa's visa regulations should be prioritized to ensure better balance between security concerns as well as the growth and recovery of the tourism sector, which has been decimated by COVID-19. The tightening of visa regulations is out of step with a global move towards an easing in visa regulations. Countries are typically making it easier for tourists to travel, and South Africa needs to take advantage of this opportunity. Tourism activities are important for supporting labor-intensive growth due to its ability to absorb large numbers of workers. The review of visa regulations would also enable companies to import critical and scarce skills necessary for our growth ambitions. Fifth, supporting supply chains for small, micro and medium enterprises is one of the long-standing structural reforms that can be easily harvested through both the public and private sectors. We need to enable a culture that is supportive of small businesses. This includes paying them on time, creating business opportunities through set-aside agreements, improving oversight and monitoring of subcontracting relationships, and reducing red tape by easing the regulatory environment to mitigate startup costs for SMEs. One of the challenges that we at Absa identified was that most SMEs find certain contracts too large and complex to compete for. As a solution to this, we now unbundle large contracts into smaller pieces of work to enable emerging enterprises to participate. We've also moved away from asset-based criteria for SME funding and use secured supply or service contracts as the basis for funding. Sixth, good governance is critical to boosting investor confidence and enabling sustainable growth. Corporate scandals and public sector corruption, including the recent COVID-19 procurement corruption, remind us of the responsibility we all have to be deserving of the trust placed on us as leaders. Integrity must define our collective leadership ethos. The responsibility on all of us to adopt a vigorous anti-corruption agenda in order to secure a better future for generations to come. The cost of corruption to society is too high and should not be tolerated. At the Financial Times Africa Summit in London in 2019, President Cyril Ramaphosa said corruption had cost South Africa as much as R1 trillion, a staggering amount of money that could have been made available for positive impact on the lives of millions of young people across the country. As business, we support the President's stance on corruption, along with the commitment to give law enforcement agencies additional resources to enable them to bring those implicated to book. As leaders, we also have a responsibility to run our businesses in a manner that is above reproach. 7, also critical in the pursuit for good governance is the existence of a robust and independent media. The link between democracy, press freedom, and development is well articulated. Several studies, including from the World Bank and the United Nations, have shown that the more freedom journalists have, the better the control over corruption, and the greater the focus of resources on priority development issues. strengthening the capacities of media and civil society, including marginalized groups, to participate effectively in governance processes can only be good for building a sustainable future. Turning to the medium to long term, the following must be prioritized. Firstly, South Africa's escalating job crisis requires urgent attention. Labor-intensive growth is necessary to reduce high levels of unemployment. Services sectors have been the fastest growing in the domestic economy, growing an average of over 6% per annum since 2009. Construction, retail, and tourism sectors offer great scope to support inclusive growth. We need to prioritize deliberate interventions that encourage growth in employment-intensive sectors. Secondly, delivering a capable state supported by a new compact between the government, private sector, labour, and other social partners is critical. This can be achieved through bolstering capabilities of the state across national, provincial, and local government, especially functions that are at the coalface of service delivery and interaction with business. Municipalities, for instance, are afflicted with chronic financial mismanagement, poor record keeping, and lack of adequate skills. Initiatives to resolve some of these challenges should be a key focus of efforts between the public and private sectors. In addition, government's commitment to the public and private sector compact should prioritize achieving the right balance between policy revisions and providing the certainty that is necessary to attract investment. The private sector's commitment must also ensure that business supports government policies that are unambiguously in the public interest. Third, the upgrade of public infrastructure is key to creating long-term economic growth and associated spin-offs. The country needs to prioritize and execute projects that can create massive jobs and have vast multiplier benefits for the economy, driven through well-coordinated partnerships between business and government. Rail, road, and digital infrastructure is currently concentrated in a few urban nodes, while the majority of the country is not as well connected. Greater connectivity is a critical pillar for overcoming socioeconomic divides, poverty, and inequality. Bringing in private sector participation in infrastructure will increase investment and improve service delivery without weighing heavily on the sovereign balance sheet. In conclusion, our country begins to emerge from the debilitating impact of COVID-19. We have an opportunity to re-engineer our economy by leveraging all resources across government, business, labour, and civil society to address the social and economic challenges that continue to beset us. The collaborative approach towards fighting the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that greater cooperation between different stakeholders can yield remarkable results in a short space of time. As business, we acknowledge that we must collaborate with government to address the country's challenges. Through inclusive partnerships, we can reduce inequality and generate opportunities to create an economy that is far more inclusive than we had before the pandemic. A competitive economy that participates effectively in global and regional value chains grows faster and more sustainably. We need to work together in actively looking for innovative opportunities that create sustainable businesses, stimulate jobs, and build skills to deliver an accelerated economic recovery and a shared national vision. To achieve this, both government and business need to appreciate that the required interventions cannot be achieved all at once. We need to further prioritize the necessary reforms that will yield faster economic growth with greater impact. Company boards have a critical role to play in supporting management during times of crisis and in helping ensure appropriate thought is given to how to mitigate the next crisis. As leaders, we have a responsibility to influence all our places of leadership, to be ethical and fair, and to be agents of positive change in the way we do business. Short-term compromises and bitter medicine will be required to achieve longer-term strategic goals and objectives. The pandemic has shown us that it is both necessary and doable. I thank you.